Hello, boys and girls. As I explained, today is an asynchronous day because of back to school night and because of textbook distribution. So now that we've taken roll, I'd like you to, at your leisure, go through today's class. What I've done is I have recorded a lecture about chemical energy and life, which is what we started to learn about last class, which you did some independent work from the textbook on. And then we're going to talk about an introduction to photosynthesis. These are both pretty difficult concepts. These are things that get me really excited because it's like we're peeking beyond what we can actually see to this sub-microscopic level of molecular activity that is like the real reason that everything happens on Earth. This is like how it actually happens. So get ready to have your mind blown. This stuff is awesome. All right, let's begin by reviewing what you started working on last class, which was chemical energy, the energy of life. So for your do now, I'd like you to go ahead and click on this link. And you're going to answer a question that you discussed in that work from last class, which is the analogy of ATP as a battery. So in your own words, in the discussion, I would like you to type in, what is ATP, right? You read about it. I'd like to hear what you remember. If you need to go back and look at the text, you can find the link in yesterday's class. And I'd like you to write down what you know ATP to be in your own words. How would you describe that? And why is the analogy of a battery so good? Okay, so why don't you pause the video now and do your do now, and then we'll return to the main page. Fantastic. Well, in your do now, hopefully you talked about ATP as being an energy carrying molecule, which is what is chemical energy, right? It is energy that is stored inside of a chemical. Makes sense, right? Now, we've talked about energy in light before, and that's what's so cool about photosynthesis is that it converts energy from one form, light, into another form, chemical energy, that living things can use. So ATP is a form of chemical energy. Now, how exactly does this work? Well, ATP is this molecule down here on the right, labeled ATP. Don't worry, the A stands for adenosine, which is this green group plus the gray sugar here. It's adenine plus a ribose sugar. Don't worry about that. That's just part of the name. And then it says T. The T stands for tri, meaning three. And the P is for phosphate, which you learned last class was an essential nutrient for life on this planet because it is a part of this molecule, ATP, and it's part of our DNA. So you can see on this diagram of the molecule that it has three phosphate groups. So that is the fully charged version, ATP. Now, ATP can break one of those phosphate bonds. And when it breaks the last phosphate bond, it can release energy. Those are high energy bonds. So the energy from that bond can be used to do some kind of work inside of a living cell, usually making some kind of chemical reaction take place that couldn't take place otherwise. Now, when it loses that phosphate and gives off that energy to do something, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The D stands for 2, and you can see that on the left here has 2 phosphates. But what's so cool about this molecule is that it can be recharged. So you can put another phosphate back onto it, and then it becomes the fully charged triphosphate version again, ATP. Whoa. So there is this constant recycling of this molecule within your body, and ATP is used to do just about everything. So analogy I like to use is that ATP is like the money of the cell. It's like having dollar bills, right? If you've got enough dollar bills, you can do anything. And everybody will take your dollar bills. So you can just pay for everything in dollar bills. Um, and we'll learn soon that your body needs more than dollar bills. Right? Dollar bills are really handy, but they're not always practical. And they're not good for storing large amounts of money. So, but let's get back to this idea of ADP and ATP and this that they can switch from one to the other. Now, I'd like you to just look at this video about how ADP is transformed to ATP. Scientists can't actually see this happening, but they have gathered enough evidence that they know that this is in fact what takes place, that there are these complex molecular machines in all the cells of our body that are just constantly cranking out ATP from ADP and recycling that ADP and ATP all the time. Okay, this is amazing. So I'd like you just to watch this video. There's nothing to listen to. We're just going to watch it and just kind of be amazed that this thing exists many trillions of times over in your body and is functioning at a rapid pace every waking hour of your life. So that weird thing is called ATP synthase. It is an enzyme. You'll notice that it's floating on a bunch of colorful looking bubbles there. Well, that's a cell membrane within your mitochondria. You've heard about mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, right? Well, it's the powerhouse of the cell because it's making ATP, chemical energy that your body can use to do so many cool things. Now, this molecular machine, as we call it, the ATP synthase, you'll notice there's that kind of spinny orange part, and then there's this top part. What's cool about the top part is that it's sort of very subtly opening and closing. And each time that it opens, just a little crack, one of those green molecules comes on in and sort of docks on the inside. And that's an ADP, sort of the uncharged battery. Then there's a little space where a phosphate, they're just floating around. The phosphate will also come in and it'll kind of dock right next to the ADP and get attached. And the ATP synthase, this big machine, will sort of smush them back together and turn ADP back into the recharged ATP. And then it'll open up again, just a little crack, and the ATP will float out and go out to the cell to do its amazing job. So there's the inorganic phosphate, and it is going to link up with the ADP, and now we've got ATP. And you'll see it'll sort of go away, and then this station is open again to recharge another ADP into an ATP. And this happens over and over again, extremely fast. Now, how does that top part open and close? Well, it's very mechanical. That orange spinny part is what's making it open and close. As it spins, because it isn't straight, it's a little bit crooked, and as it spins, it causes the top part to open and close just a little bit. What's making it spin? Well, you've heard of protons. Protons are just charged hydrogen ions. And there are a whole bunch of them on one side of this membrane, and they want to get to the other side. And the only way they can get through is where the ATP synthase is. And so as they flow from one side of the membrane to the other, they actually provide the energy to make this thing turn around. It's kind of like a water wheel, like we used in our analogy the other day. It's amazing. Look at the cell membrane there, that phospholipid bilayer. They can't get through that, but they can get through the ATP synthase. Truly remarkable. I mean, just kind of mind-blowing that this is happening inside our body and is responsible for life. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So how do we get our ATP? Well, we get our ATP by the food that we eat. right? But where does the food we eat come from? Well, we've been talking about this, right? The food that we eat, because we're in a higher trophic level, eventually goes back to coming from a producer, and from the producer, from the sun. So now we've got to talk about photosynthesis, because that's where our energy is ultimately coming from. Remember this picture that we looked at the other day? You guys really did a great job of talking about the patterns, and there was a lot of people noticing these green dots that were all over the thing. Well, now we're going to focus in on those green dots. Those green dots are very cool and very important structures called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the photosynthetic sugar fairies of the cell. Right? They synthesize glucose using sunlight. Wouldn't that be awesome if we could just bask out in the sun and make food doing nothing more than absorbing sunlight? Solar-powered life, that would be great. Well, that's what plants are. So how do they do it? How does photosynthesis work? Okay, my goal for the rest of this class is to give you kind of a simplified version of how photosynthesis works. Going deeper than you've hopefully learned it in the past, but not quite at our college level yet. Okay, so where are these chloroplasts? Well, you saw them inside of those plant cells on the previous slide, and they are, in all of the green parts of plants. So let's take a kind of magical voyage inside of the plant's leaves and get a little bit closer, actually a lot closer look at what these structures look like. Ooh, traveling inside the leaves of a redwood tree. How do you get inside a leaf? Well, if you look closely enough, like under a microscope, you'll see that there are tiny, tiny holes in the leaf called stomata. This is where air can pass back and forth to each side of the leaf. So we're going to follow the path that carbon dioxide and oxygen take in and out of the leaf. Here we go inside. Well, notice all the cells that make up the inside of this plant's leaf. And if we go inside one of those cells, we're going to notice that the cell has all the organelles maybe that we've learned about in the past, like a nucleus and Golgi apparatus and endoplasmic reticulum and mitochondria, like those purple things there, and that big central vacuole in the middle of a plant cell. But those green circles are the important thing for plants. Those are chloroplasts. So let's go inside the chloroplast and take a look around and see what cool structures are inside there. Whoa! Oh my goodness, giant green pancakes. And I feel like we're in some kind of liquid here. Well, those giant green pancakes are a thing called thylakoids. And that's the structure that captures sunlight in the plant's leaves. It's green because it's full of chlorophyll. Now, what are those? You know what those things are. You biochemist, you. There's ATP synthase. And look at that, it's creating ATP using light energy. So it's able to capture light energy, and that is powering those ATP synthases along with some molecular components from water that has been absorbed into the cell to make ATP. So we're getting light energy converted into chemical energy right there. Now that's actually only half the story. That is what we call the light-dependent reaction, because light is required for the energy to make ATP synthase make ATP. Now, as I mentioned before, ATP is great, but plants can't store energy as ATP. ATP is great for immediate use, but you need to have energy around for when it's dark or other times when there might not be enough ATP being produced. So you want to store it in a bigger molecule. And the molecule that is made in photosynthesis is glucose, a carbohydrate, a sugar. So what we just saw made ATP. There's a second part of photosynthesis called the light-independent reaction that takes place outside those thylakoids, the green pancakes, in the liquidy part of the chloroplast called the stroma. The light-independent reaction uses the ATP that was made from the first part. And what it does is it uses that ATP to smush together carbon dioxide molecules that have floated into the leaf and diffused into the chloroplast in a cycle, and it puts together a bunch of those carbon dioxide molecules to form glucose. So that ATP chemical energy can be used to make a bigger molecule that can store even more energy. And then the plant can save that, break down that glucose later to do a bunch of jobs to make more and more ATP, or it might decide to put together some of that glucose with other glucose molecules to make a humongous storage molecule called starch. Or maybe it'll make another carbohydrate called cellulose, which is actually much of what plants are made of. So there's all kinds of use for those awesome storage molecules. Of course, those storage molecules have another great purpose, which is that as part of the plant, they can be eaten by other things, by consumers. So those consumers or heterotrophs come along and eat the plant, and now they have all that stored energy, and they can release that stored energy in the process of respiration to make ATP in their own bodies. Fantastic. So now we kind of see how light energy has been transferred into chemical energy, and how that chemical energy can be stored in a larger molecule of glucose that can then be moved around through the food web to different trophic levels, including ourselves. So awesome, and it is mind-blowing to think about what is going on that molecular level that makes life possible. Okay, I'd like you guys to dig in a little bit deeper, and you're going to go into the textbook. So the link is on the homework link right down here. It is the homework questions for 4.1. Come on down and get your textbook either today or on Monday. Monday, make sure you look at the Canvas page so you can see what your asynchronous lesson is for Monday. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend full of good things. Please reach out to me on Reminder email if you have any questions. Until then, I will see you.